McKenna. You'll notice that this meeting is being recorded. The governor was very kind to allow us to record this to permit CMC alumni and parents to view this later, to learn more about what he's doing in Montana and some of his future plans. You'll notice that some of you came in as Jenna Goff. We accidentally shared the wrong link in our reminder email. Our apologies, but go ahead and right click on that if it says Jenna and change your name to whatever your name may be. Hope everyone's doing well and being safe. I know there's a lot of disappointing news out there with the resurgence of COVID-19 in many hotspots. We're thrilled and very lucky to have Governor Steve Bullock, CMC class of '88, here with us to share what he's doing in Montana and his thoughts of the situation going on around the world right now. Many of you have submitted questions, and I'll be asking the governor a lot of those questions, focusing first on COVID-19 and the pandemic before getting into some of those other questions that are on everyone else's minds. Many of you know that we did unfortunately close the college in mid-March and move to an online platform for all of our students, and we are working around the clock to do whatever we can to make sure that we can open up in August, and the governor's daughter, oldest daughter, will also be joining us in the fall. So congratulations, Governor Bullock. We're very excited to have your daughter with us as well. It's also a new year for us. July 1 was the beginning of a new academic year, new fiscal year. Thank you to everyone who has supported Claremont McKenna College, whether it be through your time, your talents, and of course your philanthropy. We can't do all that we do without you and without your continued support. So hopefully you will still be able to engage with us, even though virtually, for many months and many years to come. It is now my pleasure to introduce Governor Steve Bullock, a native of Montana who graduated from CMC in 1988. And of course, Governor Bullock, Jack Pitney is on the line. I saw him log in. Jack was, Professor Pitney was Governor Bullock's thesis reader back in 1988. After going to law school at Columbia, Governor Bullock worked in both Washington, D.C. and Montana before eventually running and being elected the Attorney General of Montana, and then now a two-term governor of Montana as well. So Governor Bullock, thank you for being with us, and I turn the stage over to you.
Thanks, Evan. And hey, it's a gift to get to be on here. When I was asked if I'd do it, I'd said, of course. And it's also been fun just sort of paging through some of the 8 pages of all of this, folks on the Zoom call, because also getting to see some people that I haven't seen in quite some time. And some of you at reunions have heard some of the stories of like the first time I ever even saw Claremont's campus was when I showed up for the first day of orientation as a freshman, because the idea of college visits were a little bit sort of beyond my family's financial means. And the relationships of my classmates and others that I'd see, and like I saw Aaron McKenna. Aaron, I'm sorry, Professor McKenna, I'm responsible for the 1B that you got at Claremont. And the professors, so many, really was impactful to my life along the way. And as Evan mentioned, my oldest daughter is going to be a freshman this year, along with, I see Jeff Hull, his daughter as well. And not to share secrets, but I had talked so much about Claremont over her 18 years. I think her essay started saying, I showed up on campus wanting to hate this place because I really didn't want to, pressure her to do it, but she made that decision on her own, which is great. And I know that she's very, very excited about it. I'm going to talk briefly, but the questions I think will be better. I look forward to hearing what you all might wonder about and want to talk about, but mostly it is what I'll at least talk about is being a governor during a global pandemic and what it's like when you hear that this is a locally executed, state-managed and federally supported public health emergency, and sort of the blur of the last 4.5 months as we've managed it, and I think most governors have done in the best interest and the public health interest of folks along the way. but we'll probably get into even deeper into it in the questions, because this is indeed one of the most challenging eras in the history of certainly our state and our nation. And I know the uncertainty that's been created by the COVID-19 pandemic is felt deeply by each of you. And also anyone that has children or grandchildren, trying to explain like how defining this can be, and in some respects so unanticipated by all of us in that respect. And like, who would have known what life would look like now 6 months after it started? And for the past 4.5 months now, my day-to-day job, and often late in the evening, has been packed full of meetings with public health and emergency response experts on, earlier today, I just did a press conference on a mandatory mask directive that I put out on basically trying to turn around and say, there is no guidebook on this. And how do we do best by our citizens and by our economy? How do we make sure that we're taking all the steps to be protective, but at some point also trying to learn how to live with the virus in our midst? In March, I made a set of decisions that kind of guided at least Montana's response. We'd closed our schools, and I should have looked at California, but we'd closed our schools for the Eastern Seaboard, Washington State, which was the hot spot. We'd put a stay-at-home order before well over half the states in the country did. And more than just because it's might be concerning to some how much power a governor is given under the state laws, under sort of emergency declaration authorities and powers. But more than just me making these orders, Montanans took it seriously. And as a result, even today, as we gather mid-July, Montana has the lowest positives per capita, the lowest hospitalizations per capita, the lowest deaths per capita in the nation. And for the uninitiated, you might just say, oh yeah, well, that's because you're in Montana, no one lives there, right? But like, you look at a South Dakota, and they probably have a 9 or 10x number of cases that we do. Every state around us has many, many more cases than what we have. Now, that's not to, I'll get into that a little bit, because case numbers have been going up significantly, and it certainly is concerning. But when we put in a stay-at-home order at the end of March, I think we were able to learn a bit more about COVID-19 and get our healthcare infrastructure in a position. Like, I get a report, literally, it used to be every day. Now it's at least 3 times a week. And that's everything from counting personal protective equipment at all of our healthcare facilities, to the number of beds, to the number of ventilators. But we were able to help build up the resources. Healthcare systems were able to learn more, to build up their resources. And you look at the last 4.5 months, and it's been a blur. I mean, there were times early on where, candidly, I spent, I think, as much time as a supply clerk as I did as the governor. I mean, chasing down every single possible lead where we might be able to get more N95 masks, because you shouldn't have first responders and healthcare people in the front lines without adequate protection, because they're not only sacrificing their safety, they're sacrificing the safety of their families. Or we've all had one call a week, typically, with all of the governors. And then we also have one call a week where the federal coronavirus task force, so led by the vice president, the federal officials, at times the president's been on there. And one of those was leaked relatively early on, where I was talking to the president and said, Mr. President, I'm literally 1 day away from not being able to do any testing in Montana. And that's because what the scarcity of supplies were and have been. And now, in some respects, 4.5 months into this, maybe we haven't learned all of our lessons, when it comes from a testing perspective, we may be getting back to that point as well. But we learned a lot when we shut down, and we took actions also along the way that I think has made a difference. Certainly none of us were that, I used to say that before March, social distancing was what I understood when I wanted to hold either of my daughter's hands out in public. They're like, no, we want to get away from you. We've learned about how to live with this, but we've also learned about things like contact tracing. Look, half of my cases, and this was before even the most recent spike, were identified by contact tracing, meaning immediately finding that positive person, going to their circle, finding out who all they've spoken to, getting them to quarantine and getting them to test. It's such a cornerstone of infectious disease prevention. And having rapidly available testing, both for those in those contacts, those that are symptomatic, but also greater surveillance, since we know so many people are asymptomatic, I think is so essential as we look at today and going forward. And that's where I was saying that, look, I made a goal of what I wanted to get done from testing with vulnerable populations like nursing homes. Montana has 8 federally recognized tribal nations where there's multi-generational living, there's at times health compromises. So I wanted to get dang near everybody in those areas tested, and we're getting there. But as of the last week and a half, now we're again getting to the point where the availability for fairly rapid testing. Now in Montana, it's challenged in part because we don't have the spikes of some states, but you're seeing that all across the country with access to the supplies and the reagents. We're still, everyone that's symptomatic is being tested. Those in the immediate contacts of positive people are being tested. Those in hospitals certainly are being tested. But building up that sentinel surveillance so you're getting a greater snapshot of the community is so essential. Montana, it might seem small, but for state of a little over 1 million, had set a testing target of 15,000 per week, 60,000 a month. And we finally got to that point where we're hitting it, but one of the largest reference laboratories in our state as of Monday told me, all right, we can't do any of that for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So not unlike what all of this has been, is at times you're just scrambling. It's like, where did this come from? And you've got to either figure out, use another thing, like we figured out how to manufacture our own swabs with 3D printers. I purchased a bunch of 3D printers because for a while we couldn't even get those basic test kits. I've done it. Look, I've looked at this through the lens of public health and economic first. If we're driving this by political decisions, we're probably in a heck of a lot of trouble. Because this is a virus that doesn't care about Democrats and Republicans and independents and libertarians. This is just a virus that wants to get in your body and spread. And I continue to, certainly the group around me, my daily calls and the folks are public health officials, my adjutant general of the National Guard, I actually tasked with overseeing all of this because this is both supply and logistics and cutting through things. I talk to business communities on a regular basis saying, how can we best move forward? Continue to speak to the federal government on a regular basis on how they can provide hopefully greater assistance at times. Like, we do need a national testing strategy. We do need some things that we just absolutely don't have. I've met incredible, incredible leaders doing the best they can in challenging situations. I've also had more than my share of frustrations, to be honest. I mean, it seems like a heck of a long time ago, but in April, when I was asking all Montanans, and for those of you that don't know Montana that well, like, look, we're generally libertarian, right? We have a significant distrust of government, but we really give a damn about our neighbors. But at the same time, I was saying to Montanans, we're going to shut down all your businesses and you have to stay at home. The message at the federal level was, we'll be completely open by April 15th. So it's at times been a little bit discordant for sure. Continue to have regular conversations with governors across our country because we share that same problem of being the frontline managers, and we share ideas and best practices. For those of you in California, I've had any number of calls with Governor Newsom where Montana and California are a lot different. And this was like, I haven't talked to the good gov in quite a while, but that doesn't mean that we're not all trying to figure out our best way. Governor Pritzker in Illinois, we used to have often, like once a week, a 9 o'clock call just to check in and talk about sort of, because your peer group's pretty small too as a governor. Like, who do you go complain to? And your wife and kids are tired of hearing about it. It's certainly, there's more challenging days to come. And in Montana, certainly, and around the country. But I think we're all in this together. And I think we also have to figure out how to live with this virus in our midst for a while. Now, our challenge in Montana has been in part, as we did that, people let their guard down. Like, I could identify clusters coming from 6 weddings, oddly enough, where it wasn't even necessarily the wedding, it was all the fun before and after. You can see where large group settings have occurred, which has really caused community spread at the end of the day. But we've also got to figure out, is like I know CMC and other places are, is that we need to be protective, but we also have to recognize that we have to learn to live with this virus in our midst till a vaccine occurs. And I guess on the last piece of that, masks have become an issue. Like just earlier today, I did a statewide mask mandate for any place where there were a number of positive cases. And it was a curious thing in some respects, because probably a couple of weeks ago, as we started seeing increasing numbers in a relative sense, so until July 1st, we'd had 1,000 positive cases throughout the entire time of COVID-19. Now, that's nothing if you live in any urban area. But if I go from July 1st until today, that number's doubled. And I went to, some of the public health folks had said, it's time for a mask. Like, I want to put a mask directive out. And curiously, in some respects, they said, I don't think that's a good idea, because we actually have to get Montanans to all agree on this and actually make it something socially accepted. And in a time of great division in our country, that might actually make it more difficult. So over the last 2 weeks, we certainly hoped that Montanans would take it seriously. But we also got like our largest business organization, State Chamber of Commerce, to come out and say, it's time to mask our employees. It's time to mask frontline workers. We had Tavern Association. We had the coaches of the University of Montana and Montana State University do a PSA together and say, let's mask up Montana. So as we did this, we wanted to make it more than just a government mandate, because government mandates only take you so far. Like, it wasn't my stay-at-home directive that kept people safe. It was because Montanans were bought in, and I think that's part of what the case is all over the country. So I'll stop because I could talk for far too long as an overview, and look forward to the questions and sort of any thoughts you all might have. And if I'm looking down, it's just because I'm paging through the gazillion pages of folks out here, which is pretty darn fun.
Thank you, Governor Bullock. Some of you have already started raising your hand virtually. Ben Turner has raised his hand. I also have a number of questions that have been submitted, so I'm going to go through a couple of those, and then we're going to go to the chat feature and have Ben unmute himself and ask a question. So first, I think you mentioned a little bit about working with other governors. You chair the National Governors Association from 18 to 19. Talk a little bit more about that collaboration. Are you sharing ventilators? Are you sharing PPE supplies? How is that really working?
Yeah, so I was, NGA is Democrats and Republicans, and I was National Governors Association chair a year ago. Governor Hogan from Maryland was my vice chair. And I said, I could not be happier that I'm not chair this year, Governor Hogan, because it has been, look, something where it slowed down in the last month, but it was literally every week where first the executive committee, which I'm on, but any governor could raise an issue and in a safe place that none of it was ever leaked. Because we're all dealing with this challenge in different ways, meaning the challenge is the same. No matter the size of your state, you're still dealing with the fact of trying to figure out how to make sure to have enough vets, how to make sure that you have the infrastructure in place. So there has been, when California, as an example, was looking at buying a gazillion N95 masks, and I was literally on the phone for at least an hour or two each day trying to track down leads. Because the idea was, right, that this was all going to be solved by the private market and private supply chains. You'd get a little bit from Strategic National Stockpile or from FEMA. But the problem is, if you're a new entrant into the private market, being the state, you have no way to actually get those materials. And it's every state, if you get them, all you do is immediately push it out to the first responders and the healthcare facilities. So I was talking for a little while with Governor Newsom, if he got that significant large order of me just buying, I think at the time was 1 million of them, and did the same with another large state, Illinois. At the end of the day, we figured out our supply and we figured out a way to get it right without having to use them. So it hasn't been necessarily, well, when I was really in a struggle for N95 masks, the governor of North Dakota got me 50,000, which was significant. It hasn't always been about supplies, but it's also been about best practices. When I was putting a stay-at-home order, yeah, I looked at what other states that had preceded me did, but then also called a few of the govs and said, how's this working? How's this not? And they'd be very candid with saying, here are problems. So I think we've learned from one another. You know, I always said before this that a governor's role, in part, as the chief executive of the state, is to steal the best ideas from other states. And here it has been fairly collaborative, though. And we have been, it's been great. Democrats and Republicans have been, when it comes to some of the issues dealing with our federal partners, have been unified. And coming up with statements of like, here are the challenges that we're all facing, and here's what we expect from you in going forward. And, you know, that's been everything from what happens in this coronavirus relief funds, the CARES Act, to some of the testing issues that we've had, some of the supply issues we've had.
Thank you. How do you view Montana's pandemic response capacity before the spread of COVID-19? And then what would you do differently to plan accordingly for the future?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like in 8 years of serving as governor, as an example, I might have done 2 press events with my state medical officer. Great guy. For 2 months, I probably talked more to Dr. Greg Holzman than I did my wife, meaning that you end up in this where if you're relying on people, that it becomes so intense. And there are parts of public health. Hopefully what happens through all of this is that we all get a much deeper and greater appreciation for public health. And that's at the state, local, and federal levels, because if public health does its job right, you never know a damn thing about them, right? Because you don't have an outbreak of something. And if things seem too restrictive, then it's their fault. So the public health, in a general sense, was prepared for things like this because they've dealt with it in the past. The idea of hopefully the local state relationships, the reporting relationships, what needs to be done with contact tracing was certainly something that wasn't invented 5 months ago with COVID-19. But when it comes to actually having the supplies that you need, I mean, a lesson from this certainly is that if I don't have a couple months of supply of personal protective equipment, at least for my healthcare facilities going forward, no matter what the issue might be, then we're really could end up in a difficult place. Look, I've built what I'll call facilities that I can stand up if I have a mass outbreak, where I'll essentially build a field hospital. Now they're in Connex metal containers now that can be set up. I don't think that states were adequately prepared for this, but I also don't think the federal government was by any means. I mean, the notion that we ought to be able to, the strategic national stockpile has to mean something in cases of emergencies. The idea of testing supplies, even when you're dealing with something, a new virus, that can't be what holds us up in addressing issues like this. So I don't think that, on the one hand, anywhere was quite prepared for the global pandemic that we're in. But I think we could have done a hell of a lot, or a heck of a lot more, all of us, so we weren't spending so much time initially just trying to react to the crisis.
Thank you. One more question from that was pre-submitted before we go over to Ben in the participant section. Higher education, K through 12 education. This is obviously a major issue for Claremont McKenna College, but for all public and private schools out there. What are your thoughts on higher education opening in the fall in Montana? What are your thoughts on in-person versus online as we go through COVID-19? And then what are some of your tension points that a governor like yourself considers when encouraging or discouraging the opening of public K through 12 schools?
Should I say selfishly, as a parent of a Claremont grad who sure hopes that she's there? Look, I will go through on all of those. When I did a statewide school closure in Montana, I knew I'd be hurting some kids. The safest place for many of our kids to go is our schools. We know that they're protected. We know that they're fed. We know that their social and emotional well-being is taken care of, unfortunately, much more than, this is even talk about educational losses. An example, reports to my child abuse hotline statewide went down 44%. It's not because child abuse wasn't occurring. It's because they weren't around mandatory reporters. And I think for most of the parents on this call, to be honest, that I've always called the K-12 system our great equalizer, meaning it allows anybody that opportunity. Like, I'm a product of the same schools that my kids went to, and in part because teachers wrapped their arms around me. But the disparities in education are so much more significant when you try to move to a remote learning model. We talked to a teacher in a freshman math class, 30% of the kids were even going online each week. So the losses are significant. Now, that doesn't mean that the health concerns aren't real significant. And as we go into November, none of us, and I think education did the best it could in a really challenging time, but it's another thing that we just announced, like, I'm buying bulk PPE, personal protective equipment, which includes masks, which includes gloves, which includes disinfectant, but also includes thermometers for every one of the schools in Montana. I'm going to the point of saying that we're looking at what national models are saying would be the cost per student to safely reopen. And I'm saying for any school that does even partial back in-person instruction, we'll pay that. Because school will look a little bit different, but we've got to figure out a way to get that direct educator-student contact. My university system here is, the public university system is 40,000 students. I've been working a lot with higher ed, even though there's some constitutional separation, to say, how can we most safely reopen, knowing that this virus is still going to be here? Part of it certainly is educational losses. Part of it is, I think President Chodosh, one of the times when I was on campus, when there was discussion about how much bigger is Claremont going to get, is that he said something like, we lose money by our students. I mean, it's not the tuition that covers this. But like if we shut down and just had our state university system online only from now on, the attrition would be so significant. And I think that will further make it difficult to keep all of our educational institutions open. So I'm working in the positive way of saying, look, we've got to figure out ways to live with this virus in our midst. Education's going to look different. For our K-12, it may not be 5, and it probably won't be in most of our areas, 5 days a week, 7 hours a day in the classroom. It used to be students would rotate. It may be teachers rotating. But we have such creativity and ingenuity that we can figure out how to do this as safely as possible, not just for our kids, but also our teachers. That there are some teachers that should be, even if the kids are in class, that they should be on a screen because of their potential health vulnerabilities. We have to have the testing regimens figured out, but do it in a way that, especially because, I sure hope, like all of you, I'm tired of this. I've said a million times, I'm so tired of this. I just wish the virus was as over it as I am. Since the virus is going to be around a while, we've got to figure out a way of what this colloquial new normal looks like to best serve the educational community, and that's K through 20. And I don't personally think that remote learning or online learning, it certainly doesn't replace for our youngest kids. The Claremont, like every college, has to figure out, especially as we see spikes, what's the best things to do. But we all know so much of the college experience isn't even the professor speaking to the kid or the student, it's the students speaking to one another. And it's those discussions that happen late at night in a dorm where so much of the growth occurs.
Thank you. All right, Ben, if you want to unmute yourself, ask your question.
Governor Bullock, thank you so much for being here. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can, Ben.
Awesome. So I'm Canadian and I went to CMC. And so I feel like a kinship, even though I've never been to Montana, with just sort of the more sparse, a little bit more kind of wilderness sort of vibe that is different from, I think, a lot of the ways that the states have been dealing with this.
And I share a border of 3 provinces, unlike
Totally.
any other state. So I count Canada as my good friends.
I see you as kin. What I wanted to ask was, you had the opportunity to run for the presidential nomination with the Democratic Party. You're now running for a Senate seat. Has the pandemic changed the way you see the relationship between the states and the federal government? Because I know as a Canadian, it's been concerning to see, the kind of partisanship that has come with individual states' responses to the virus, as well as the federal government's response. And I was really struck by how differently I think you saw the presidential run, given your ideas and your planks. And I'd just be really interested to know whether there's anything you're taking from your experience in Montana to sort of the federal government and how you might see it differently than either your fellow potential future senators or your fellow governors.
Yes. So meaning that if I'm elected, will I view the world different than the U.S., most of them? Yeah, I think in part, and this might be self-serving, but I've said that unfortunately, and I'll also talk about the federal-state relationship, but I think that Washington's become a place where talking about things is a substitute for doing things. And the deep partisanship that we have, meaning that like senator will say, well, oh, that was a great speech I gave. Well, it didn't change anyone's life. And the deep-seated partisanship holds us back in so many ways. Like for those that are the uninitiated for Montana, the whole time I've been governor, my legislature's been between 60% and 2/3 Republican, and I'm a Democrat. And if I don't work with people that view the world differently than me, I don't get things done. I don't think that DC always does that. So I think I would bring a different perspective in that respect. 12 years in public office, 8 years as governor, and 4 years as attorney general. It's no hyperbole to say that this has been the most intense period that I've ever had. And I think having that experience as it relates to COVID in DC would be really helpful, because this isn't about, I put out a press release every time someone dies. And I'm so damn tired of putting out press releases. I think it would bring a different perspective. Now, Professor Pitney and others taught us all about this great system of federalism. And I do believe that so many of the good ideas come from the laboratories of democracy, right? The states. And I also think that, look, even as a governor, like one thing that we solved a couple of years ago or helped address is funding for fires, right? In the West and throughout, right? The way the Forest Service has always done it is you have a bad fire season, they spend all their money on fires. That means that they can't spend money on watershed restoration or things like that. But it was Democrat and Republican governors who came together and said there's got to be a better way, and then jointly pushed Congress. I do think for national emergencies, like what we're in here, greater national leadership would be very helpful. Like, we need to have a national testing strategy. We need to have more than, well, we'll just put this on the governor's laps for whatever they might want to do, because look, you see the results state by state, and that doesn't benefit anyone. So I do think I'd bring a bit of a different perspective. And I think that this is a time where, we need to be, well, for our neighbors to the north. I mean, to your point, Ben, that two of the three premiers, I have their cell phones. And even through this, I've had a number of conversations about what they were doing in Canada and what we were doing in the US, or what I was trying to do in Montana more than the US. But thank you for the question.
All right, Michael Irvine, you are next. If you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Awesome. Hi, Governor. Thanks for talking with us this evening.
It's great to get to.
Yeah, so you actually just touched on this at the end of your last answer. But I was curious, because you mentioned learning from other governors and what other states are doing, whether at kind of the state and local level, we're also looking internationally for policy examples and kind of best practices. It seems like some other countries and locations, South Korea, Germany, Hong Kong, have done a really good job. And I'm curious, are there things we can learn from that, or are there circumstances just too different?
Well, I think there are things that you can learn, but I think we also have to do it. Like, public health should guide this within the confines and constraints of who we are as a country or a state. Like, I had, and rightfully so, right? I had app developers saying, if you'll only put an app on everyone's phone, well, contact tracing will be easy. Montana uniformly fought against the Real ID Act, Democrats and Republicans, to the bitter end, because there was a mistrust of federal government. And the idea that I'd say everyone is going to have an app. Now, look, on the one hand, that's most protective of public health. On the other hand, there are going to be limitations in a nation or in a state that we've got to be recognizing that, the best thing for public health would be flat out, everybody stays at home forever till we have a vaccine. That's not going to work, and it's not going to work for our economy. But I do think we can learn from other states when it comes, other nations when it comes to school reopenings. And I think, like, the idea that masks, like we are, as a nation, I say this on July 15th, where finally you have national leaders saying, wear a mask. Like some of the ways that politics has crept its way in to a public health response is just no way to manage a global pandemic. And we could have done a heck of a lot better. But I hope that we are learning from other nations along the way and incorporating some of the things that might be most protective, yet still consistent with sort of the values of our country, or at times the values of individual states. I mean, it's interesting, as I mentioned masks, that it was actually some of those quote unquote most conservative states that finally said, I don't care what the discussion is, we got to do this, right? So at some point, crisis may help in all instances, but it's so unfortunate that we have to get to that point where that crisis is really occurring.
CMC is an economic powerhouse in addition to a government and international relations powerhouse. If the Athenaeum were open now, I'm pretty sure we'd have lots of conversations about the stay-at-home order and its economic impact and whether it's relevant, it's justified. What are your thoughts? How do you weigh the stay-at-home order with what it's doing to small and large businesses in Montana and across the nation?
Yeah, and look, I got hit by, as an example, like when we shut down hard and early relative to most of the country. Then those that maybe life is good, here's my sunny ray of optimism. When you get to the point of beyond just the immediate public health crisis where politics can start interceding, maybe that's a good thing because people aren't just worrying about, am I going to lose my mother or my grandfather? But, that was getting the hit of, oh, look at all the people that you caused to be unemployed. And the unemployment increases in Montana are bigger than our surrounding states. Well, then I could go a month later and say, we actually had the third fastest employment growth in the nation, or this was last month, 7th lowest unemployment rate. But that's because we took it seriously and because we had stopped the spread of the virus. Folks are hurting, and we've got to figure out ways to address that. And that's another of the masks. I don't want to go back to complete stay-at-home order or shutting down all businesses because we've got to look at long-term of this, what this looks like. But I think the stay-at-home orders were absolutely essential for those states that did it. Because as bad as we're seeing spiking over the last couple of weeks, what we would have had then is not only those spikes, but healthcare systems that were absolutely overwhelmed. And look, in some corners of our pockets of our country, it's getting back to that. But then I think we also have to recognize a couple other things. Like, we did state business stabilization dollars for our small businesses. The majority of businesses in Montana or across the country are actually the smaller businesses. Now, I learned when we did that 44% of them didn't get anything from the Paycheck Protection Program. If businesses are going to stay open, we're saying, all right, I'll figure out a way to pay for your plastic sheetings or, the plexiglass and stuff like that, because we have to, if you're going to be open, be protective. I think uncertainty, part of what has driven the economics, but not all, by all means, is you can open up your main street, but if folks don't feel safe going there, they're still not going, it's not going to get to that point. So a long way to say, I think that the stay-at-home orders were essential. I think now we have to take the protective measures and recognize that, unfortunately, we're going to be hit for a while economically in this. V-shaped, U-shaped, I'll leave that to the professors at Claremont. I will say, and it's like one thing that I did going in, like long for a global pandemic, right? I'd always insisted leaving north of $300 million, which may seem small, in the bank when our legislature left. I started a fire fund because fire seasons can be so significant. So I built up a bunch of money into a fire fund. I built up a statutory rainy day reserve. So as we go through this from a state side, like my state budget can probably weather this, depending on what this looks like 6 months from now. But when I talked about how governors had worked together, it's also been great to see that Democrats and Republicans have said, look, you're not going to have a healthy economy if you're cutting frontline workers, if you're cutting essential health workers, if you're cutting first responders. So that as the federal government looks at what needs to be done next, as we talk about helping out businesses, they also got to be helping out their state and local budgets.
All right, David Murphy, if you want to unmute and ask your question. Welcome, David.
Well, hi there, Governor, and thank you so much, Evan, for moderating. Great job. I feel like we're at the app. You know, I saw Jill Stark on here and John Ferrenda, David Edwards.
The wine's not as good, though, David.
Tea. Well, you know, no ass tea either. I want a chocolate-covered strawberry. But I just wanted to ask you, besides chocolate-covered strawberries, perhaps, in the app, what else do you remember most about CMC? What are some of your favorite memories, good and bad? Maybe you can share with us any stories.
I don't know if that's a suitcase you want to unpack, David. No, for me, it has been truly a gift in as much as that, you know, I said at the start, like, I showed up on campus trying to figure out, oh, I can't believe all the swimming pools are outside. You know, because you wouldn't think about that. And I think I met Jill Stark because President Stark needed cowboy boots for something, and I'll be darned if I might have been the only one that had them. But the good was a professor saying, I can't believe that you weren't at class. What was going on? Meaning that for me, like, I applied to 2 schools, University of Montana, and my mom had found would research Claremont or colleges over lunch break, and she found Claremont. So I said, all right, all my friends are going to U of M. This sounds okay. I'll do it. But for me, it was a gift of, first of all, recognizing that I'd gotten a great education, even if I hadn't always applied myself through high school, and I could compete with some of the best and the brightest along the way. It's friendships and relationships that I've built. My youngest son is named Cameron. Well, one of my good friends from Claremont was named Cameron, and my wife just sort of fell in love with him. It's the fact that I still email with some of my professors. It's the fact that I can see some people on this call that I haven't talked to enough as of late, but still remember how they helped me grow intellectually and dynamically. It's look, for you at 2004 versus 1988 graduate, I was the second class of PPE. So I got in because probably not many people wanted to apply, but how I was tested on a regular basis during that time to actually articulate my views and express my views helped me. Now, I'll tell you that maybe the good, the bad, the indifferent, I think Claremont was a much more probably politically conservative place then than it is today. And, you know, never forget Professor Ballitzer, who was a professor of political philosophy, who said, hey, Montana, you're a token Democrat. What do you think? And I probably was a token Democrat, right? I don't necessarily, I think it's good that there's greater diversity of thought today. I don't think that it set me back in as much as Evan said at the start. I think it was, you know, Jack Pitney's first or second year of being on campus, coming straight out of the National Republican research and communications, when I said, will you be my thesis reader? And he did an incredible job, and 30 years later has been supportive of me along the way. So long way to say, I think both the relationships that I've built, the ability to look at people that not all of which that I've talked to, but know that if they wanted anything from me, I'd give it to them. And likewise, that my official office, it was a little hard for them to understand, because if a student or someone called and said, I'm calling from Claremont McKenna College, like, as you might imagine, as governor, you get a heck of a lot of calls from all kinds of people that want to talk to you. But if someone went to CMC, I'm like, I'm going to find a way to try to help them, or at least have the conversation and do what I can because of what the college gave to me and what my classmates gave to me. I want to be able to give to anybody that had that shared experience.
Thank you. Alec I think you're from Chicago. Alec Lopata. Go ahead, Alec.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Governor Bullock. I can't imagine how busy it must be between an intense campaign and a pandemic and running a standard governor's office. So thank you so much for all of that. I'm curious, you're pretty unique as a Democrat. Your poll numbers for such a conservative state, you are probably one of the few who's able to relate across the aisle and relate to these Trump supporters that many Democrats may have written off. And I know in your presidential campaign, you talked a lot about how you had that ability to relate across the aisle, but I'm curious sort of more as you think about how you relate to them, what's your sort of secret sauce of what makes you different from other Democrats and how you've been able to bridge that gap and really develop that kind of unique appeal in a state like Montana that many national Democrats would have otherwise written off if it weren't for you?
Yeah, and I think the writing off is a big part of it. Yeah, so background, 2016 was the only Democrat in the country to win a statewide reelected, a state where Trump won. He took Montana by 20, I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And to be candid, there's not that much from a worldview perspective that President Trump and I probably share. I've begun with a base presumption that most people's lives, and this is, I think, the way that I both run for office and the way I've governed. Most people's lives are too busy or frantic for politics, right? They're more worried about, am I going to lose my job? Is my kid going to get sick? And there are certainly true ideological differences, but the values that most people hold, everybody wants a safe community. Everybody wants a roof over their head. Everybody wants a decent job. They want clean air, clean water, good schools, and that belief you can do better for your kids and grandkids than yourself. So I've always, first of all, tried to frame it as these are the things important to people. It's not the politics. And if you can actually run on that and govern on it, you'll make a difference in people's lives. Now, I've been to a lot of places in Montana, and I think nationally we sometimes mess this up. When I've run for office in the past, haven't been like I've been governing, not doing much this time, and certainly not traveling for the campaign, where I've gone to a county and they're like, oh, you can't win this county. What are you doing here? Two things. One of which is, yeah, I know I can't win this county, but I need to get every possible vote out of it. And more important, was actually Tom Ridge, you know, the former Homeland Security guy for, I think it was Bush, who said to me, the best political advice I ever got is you run to win, but you win to run. Meaning you run for office to win the election, but the only reason to win the election is to run government or try to improve people's lives. So it's important for me to go to those places, not even if I'm not going to get every vote out of it, but if I can get a better perspective of even those that don't support me or won't support me, will I be more effective as a public servant? And that was, you know, the path to victory. Like, you might be able to cobble together the votes is if you're a Democrat, we're going to get those urban areas and the coasts, and you might be able to get to 270 electoral votes. But if you're leaving out large parts of the country, even if you win, you're never going to be able to meaningfully govern, because to govern, to move things, takes buy-in from more than just those that are elected. It actually takes buy-in from people that agree with you, and sometimes people that will overlook their disagreements but support you in areas.
Great. Art Dodd, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, Governor, thank you. I'm curious, you're in an active campaign to hold elected office for the U.S. Senate. How many times can you say the words unprepared, unexpected, and tired of before your political advisors say you just lost a vote in County X from person Y?
Now, unprepared for COVID or just generally, or tired of?
You opened with COVID comments, so speaking particularly about the pandemic, since people like you who hold elected office, their 4 favorite words the past 4 months have been unprepared, unexpected, and tired of.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that most folks are tired of, certainly. And mine, where everybody got sick of more than even that, was this is a rapidly changing and dynamic situation, right? Where literally I'd be counting the cases and saying, okay, I've got to do another directive and shut down things. But it is because it's rapidly changing. When it comes to be honest, I haven't, in making decisions, and I think by and large, this is most governors, like I can't view the things that I'm doing here through a political lens. I got to let the chips fall where they lie. And I also think, whether I like it or not, governors will generally be judged more on their last decisions than their first. I've tried not to, I've been as candid with you as I've been with any group. I've tried not to point fingers of saying, here's everything the federal government did wrong or someone else did wrong, because people don't want to hear about what people are doing wrong. They want to feel like there's a way to get our hands around this and at least be safe. So I don't know, you know, you got to be, I've tried to be rapidly, or I guess rabidly transparent, meaning telling people, here's what we don't know. Here's where I think things have fallen down. Like, it was literally 2 days ago when a national reference laboratory that I've been relying on for 2 months said, you know, we know that we've been processing your surveillance testing, but we can't do it anymore. That puts me in a big, big, rough position of how I'm going to be able to get the testing out there. But during today's press event, I said 2 days ago, this is what I learned. This is really problematic for all of us in Montana. I'm going to do my level best to address it. So I think to be able to turn around and say what you know and what you don't know and what's lacking, hopefully that's what people want, because they want the honesty. It's hard to put a gloss on some of this along the way, which in a time that is really challenging.
Thank you. It is 5:01 on the West Coast, and I think 6:01 in Montana.
Oh, let's just keep going, Evan. I'm here all night.
Everyone's ready to keep going. I know if you do need to sign off, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate it. And of course, next week we have Professor Daniel Livesey, and we also have student thesis presentations from the graduating class of 2020. Hope you consider joining us there. Governor Bullock, maybe some final comments as you look towards kind of the end of 8 years as governor, all that you've seen, relationships with other governors, with Canada. We had several questions coming in about your relationship with Canada and how they've handled this crisis versus the US, and kind of where you see Montana and the response to COVID-19 moving forward in the future.
Yeah, that's a lot. But first, thanks. And thanks to Claremont for doing this, because I think that there's another thing with stay-at-home orders and all the challenges that we as a nation have faced in the last 4 or 5 months, that connectedness, even if it's by a Zoom, becomes that much more important to people. So I think it's pretty darn cool what CMC set up last couple of months and doing this on a regular basis. Your questions were, Evan, well, 8 years of reflection and then COVID.
Looking forward, yeah.
Yeah, so 8 years of reflection is that this has been for me a gift in many respects. Look, I've had, it's been an intense job, just like all of you have intense jobs. It's been not without some sacrifice. I mean, my kids have known no other life than me in a public office, which may sound fun, but when you get defined by what your dad does or doesn't do, it's not without challenges. One of the things of this job, when I was Attorney General, I know when I won or lost a case. In this job, you won't necessarily know all the impacts of what you did or didn't do, at times for potentially years forward. Some are immediate, like when we expanded Medicaid expansion, and people would tell you the healthcare and what they got and what a difference it made. But some of it, like when you invest in education, you won't know for a long time. I would have been by and large happy to say 12 years of this and win or lose the Senate election. I'll always think of like what a gift this has been for me to get to do this and to get the public trust to do it. You use your best judgment. Not everybody's going to agree with you. You know, I've often said, right, if you want to make sure you got a friend, buy a dog, because everyone else will certainly, even your closest friends will say you haven't done enough along the way. I wish I had the crystal ball for the greater question of COVID. Like I take heart in Montana, we're still the lowest per capita positives, hospitalizations, deaths in the lower 48. And I think in part, yeah, it's what I chose to do, but how seriously Montanans took it. But I also look at, you know, you can even look at this most recent spike throughout the South, and it's not all matched up because of when states opened and reopened and things like that. So I think there's still a lot about this virus that we don't know. We're certainly in a better position than we were during the 1918 pandemic, and I'm so excited by the amount of intellectual energy and intellectual capital being put into solving this in the US and around the world. And I think that to the extent that we can, as state leaders, look at this as a public health issue first and an economic issue, but not driving it as a political issue, we're going to get through this in a lot better position. That's not always easy for some individuals and in some states, but I think that's what we have to do and what I'll do going forward. And yeah, there may well be protesters outside my house, like there have been at times for actions that we've taken, is trying to say that you're going to do the best you can, informed by the best judgment and by bringing the right people around you. And that's the way that collectively that we'll all get through this. So, but I do really appreciate you all both coming in, and more than that, while this isn't the Athenaeum, as David said, creating things like this that still allows that connection for all of us to a community that is certainly so important to me, and I think also so important to so many of you, and that's the Claremont community, whether we graduated a year ago or whether we're 3 or 5 decades past.
Thank you, Governor Bullock. Just the last question from me and a few others. Any advice to Vice President Biden on who he should select as his running mate?
So I had actually received a call a number of times to provide advice to their crew, and first few times I didn't respond. And my advice was, at the end of the day, to find somebody that's going to be a trusted partner in governing and is going to wake up each day saying, how do I make this administration, meaning the next 4 years, the most successful and impactful for Americans all across the country. And I say that knowing that, you know, there are both communities and regions and others that deeply, deeply want and deserve to be better heard. But I think that we have to make sure to be looking to, again, going back to Tom Ridge, you run to win, but you win to run, meaning you win office to be most effective in office. That more than a gazillion people giving him advice, I hope that what the vice president does is says, who can I count on to be a trusted partner in governing? And that I believe would have the qualifications and the necessity if, God forbid, something happened to him if he's successful in this election. And those touchstones of trust and partnership are probably what I hope at the end of the day that he chooses more than anything else.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for being here. We didn't get to ask questions about DACA or net neutrality, and hopefully, Governor Bullock, you'll consider joining us again, and we can hopefully talk about something other than a global pandemic. So,
Evan, anytime you tell me to, I'll join.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to unmute. You can say a quick hello and goodbye, and thank you to the governor. Everyone, be safe out there. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. Thanks, Governor.
Thank you all for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good luck,
luck.
Steve.
Good night.
Take care, buddy.
Great seeing you. So
Bye-bye.
many of you.